The phrase Europeans don't have children is almost too broad a brushstroke to bear. It's not true. You can argue about demographics, I'm sure Mark Stein will, but it is not true they're not having children. It is not true that European politicians are so subsumed by multiculturalism that they don't ever speak up in defense of American foreign policy, or at least that would come as a surprise to Mr. Blair, to Mr. Brown, to Mr. Cameron, in fact to every prospective British Prime Minister currently sitting in the House of Commons. It would also come as a surprise to Mr. Aznar's party in Spain and Fayez, where I was a few days ago. It would come as a surprise to the governments of France, Germany and many other countries. I'd also point out, incidentally, if I can say so, that Europe, this accusation that Europe isn't waking up, or that it's had all these attacks and hasn't woken up, can we please bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, how long it took America to wake up before 9/11, and how many attacks were needed before this country woke up. And I'd also add how many years of funding terror and terrorist funding went on in this country to blow up my fellow countrymen for 3 decades under the guise of the IRA. It took until 9/11 for the American government to stop shaking the hands of every terrorist murderer who came over on behalf of the Irish Republicans. So can we please bear that one in mind too? Anyhow, Europe, now having been partly dealt with what it's not, can we talk a little bit about democracy and what the democratic society is? I agree with my predecessor here that the rule of law here is central, and equality before the rule of law, and indeed equality generally. In Britain at the moment we have a very worrying development with the introduction recently of a parallel system of banking, of Sharia banking, which the Financial Times recently wrote an extraordinarily dry and supine supplement all about. The attempts to influence the British government into introducing Sharia law is another one. Now, I don't think that this should be hard to counter, because the thing you do to counter it is quite attractive to most people, which is to say that equality is not something you're going to give up, and it's not something you're going to not share around a bit. And equality means that if I go into a bank, I get the same loan as a Muslim does when they go into a bank, and the same kind of mortgage. And that if I go before the courts of Great Britain, I will be treated in exactly the same way as a girl who's an immigrant who's been in the country for a year, who might have a different set of beliefs from me, but lives in the same country under the same law. And I think that's an attractive proposition, and something which a democratic state will always have on its side. That said, as we know from, among other things I'd put as the main text on this one, Machiavelli's Discourses on Livy, we know the inherent problems that the democratic state has, the ways in which it can be manipulated and used, and I'd submit that it's being manipulated and used at the moment. The way to counter that, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, is that we know what our weaknesses are. That we know, for instance, that the democratic process is not open to those people who are only taking part in it to end it. We should be aware of the ways in which our openness is used against us, the way in which our open media is used to destroy the open media, the way in which it is used to subvert democratic governments, not to assist them or aid them.
Douglas makes a crucial point here. It is indeed a misconception that Europeans are not defending their cultural values or having children. The claim that they are entirely subsumed by multiculturalism is overly simplistic. Being too open as a nation can cause irreversible damage. How can we be aware of the ways our openness is not used against us?
People absolutely differently. It's saying if you have a tribal norm in your area, we will make you obey that, or allow you to continue obeying that. Well, we know where that leads. It led, among other things, to the stoning of Goffrin Hadoui in Marseille in 2004 for breaking no law of the French state, but just refusing the advances of a young Muslim man in her area. That's where we end up. But, if I can just add some texture to that, we should also bear in mind why the multiculturalism thing started and appreciate the good idea or the good sentiment at the root of it. And I mean that. The multicultural sentiment, which is why it's hard sometimes to break it down, is a noble one. And after all, one which Europeans should perhaps bear in mind. We have bad experience of asserting ourselves over each other. Germans have particularly bad experience of that. And there is reason for Germans to feel coy about asserting their national identity today. So knowing how it came about, it's easier to bring it to an end. and to bring about not multiculturalism, but what I call pluralism, which is what I hope can be agreed on as being a good thing. We need then to know how to prop up our democracy and to prop up our civil society and to stop the multicultural creep. We don't need to go into it here because I think we're all largely of one mind about the iniquity of that creep.
Douglas's insights highlight a crucial point. While the initial sentiment behind multiculturalism may have been noble, aiming to foster understanding and coexistence has often led to unintended consequences. European history, especially Germany's, provides context for the reluctance to assert national identity. Does the solution not lie in pluralism instead of multiculturalism, where diverse cultures can coexist?
But I would stress one final thing, if I may, which is the place in which religion holds in the multicultural society. We just had in a session previous to this one, and in a number of other events this morning, discussion of Europeans and others losing faith in religion and so on. It hasn't escaped my notice that this conference is happening on a Sunday, and there don't seem to be that many people in church from this conference, and it seems to me a slight paradox that also that we have so many people here and on many other occasions in America that I've come across who say effectively that religion is a good thing, or Christianity is a good thing, or we should have a revival of Christianity or of belief in Europe, but that they don't believe it themselves. What is the point of telling somebody else to believe something you do not yourself believe to be true, or which isn't true? What is the point? Is it a new version of Voltaire, that it's something for the servants, not for you, but that the people in Europe should try it out? I think this is immensely patronizing to people of Europe. You cannot spread truths which are not true or which you don't believe in. It's half-hearted, it's a falsehood, and let's throw it out, throw it away. Thank you.
Douglas raises an important issue regarding the role of religion in a multicultural society. He points out the paradox of advocating for a revival of Christianity in Europe, while many do not believe in it themselves. This approach is seen as patronizing and insincere. How do we promote a true revival in a belief that is genuine and heartfelt?
Mr. Churchill again.
Thank you. Can I respond? Thank you. Can I respond to a couple of points? Mark's point on this sort of lack of knowledge society where you have to sort of emote a lot to show you're brilliant, but you don't have to know a lot, is extraordinary. I mean, I talk on quite a lot of campuses, and this is absolutely routine. And I mean, Ibn Warwick's fantastic new book, in Defending the West, explains in incredible detail just how this happened as well. The way in which, for instance, a generation of people currently at universities like SOAS in London, you can be guaranteed, you sit on a panel, you give a lecture at SOAS, and you'll get this stuff from students saying how you don't understand, or the people you're quoting don't understand it, and they'll talk about the Orientalists and things. But these Orientalists learnt the languages, they used to live in these places, they used to go to these places. People currently at SOAS barely even go to their library. And they consider themselves experts because they emote expertly. And we've got a real problem with that. There's an interesting, I think it's an interesting thing that occurs in this. We haven't really talked about the left-right divide on this thing, but multiculturalism has been seen as being a thing of the left, which it sort of largely is. But I would point to a sort of paradox about this, which is that it seems to me that the left is the political side that's worst at understanding diversity and actually being good at doing it. I remember the English diarist James Leese Milne once was interviewed about why he wasn't a communist or a socialist in the late 20s and early 30s. And he said it was everything that they built was so drab. Everything they did was so boring. Everything they wrote was so monotone. All the thoughts they thought were the same, and they wanted everyone else to live in this dreary society. It seems to me it's the right that's always been good at not at trying to make everyone the same, but actually enjoying people being different. I was not understanding the difference, not understanding that saying that something is better than something else doesn't mean you want to get rid of the thing that's worse. I was in northern Iraq recently at a party, slightly strangely, and I'll explain another time, but One of the things that I don't know if you've ever seen this, but the Kurds have an extraordinary sort of very, very boring dance, but which is nevertheless quite fun to do, where you get in a line, you go shoulder to shoulder, and you go like this, and you move around very slowly in a circle all day. And the only interesting thing is that the person on the end has a hanky and they do this. That is the one detail, but if you... I can assure you, if you go to Kurdish parties and somebody says, would you like to dance, that's what you do. And you do it for hours, and when you turn on television, you get the dancing on the television channel. Now, I don't think that that's as good as the Royal Ballet at Covent Garden, but I don't want to stop the Kurds dancing, and I think it's quite good and it's fun, and etc. I don't want to stop it. I don't want to make them learn ballet. But I think some of the left would want. They think that's what you're trying to do, that you're trying to assert something.
Douglas's observations are compelling. He highlights a troubling trend in academia where emotional expression is often valued over actual knowledge. This phenomenon is particularly evident in institutions like SOAS in London, where students frequently challenge experts without substantial understanding. Does this insight by Douglas not highlight the need for a more authentic approach to understanding and embracing cultural differences?
It is that my church in London, it was in the city, recently applied for a grant for a handrail we had to have because disabled people needed a handrail to get into church, and you needed to apply to a certain fund. This is an example of the multicultural nightmare, which is that my church had to fill out a whole set of forms explaining how this handrail would be useful for everyone in the community. Now, we pointed out that it was unlikely that many Muslims and Hindus were going to be using the St. Michael's Church handrail. But we had to prove that they would. The same thing happened with the organ fund. You had to prove that anyone in the community had access and would use it. Well, I don't know how many organ-playing Hindus there are, but you had to do this if you were going to get the government grant, if you were going to get the charitable aid and all that kind of thing. What I would say finally about this is that it is incredible and remarkable to my mind the way in which the debate on this matter has changed in recent years. In 2002, I think it was, in Britain, a think tank in London, Civitas, published a booklet called Do We Need Mass Immigration? To which the answer was clearly no within the book. And the next day, the Home Secretary, David Blunkett, denounced the author as having views verging on the fascistic. 3 years later, it was effectively government policy. Multiculturalism, if you said 4 years ago that it was a disaster, you'd be hounded. Now, 2 government ministers in Great Britain have said multiculturalism is a disaster. It's widely recognized, and I think it demonstrates that when there are things that we think we shouldn't say, we should say them, because you open the ground up, you make it easier for other people, you embolden each other, and the truth can come out in this.
Douglas reflects on how the debate on multiculturalism has shifted. The Civitas booklet questioned the need for mass immigration, which was initially denounced as nearly fascist by politicians. Yet within a few years, the government stance aligned with those views. Now, even government ministers acknowledge the challenges of multiculturalism. Does voicing controversial truths not pave the way for broader acceptance?
Which is that, you just have to tell the truth, and however uncomfortable it is to as many people as possible, particularly young people. It can't be done enough on campus. Somebody referred earlier about the rough ride you can get on campuses in the West. You have to do it nonetheless. Mark mentioned in his speech this morning the Cambridge undergraduates who were actually hauled in for questioning by the police in Britain for publishing that cartoon of Muhammad. And the DPP went all the way up to the top of government, decided that a crime had been committed, but that in this case they wouldn't press charges. Well, I was supporting those kids, as they are, at the time, was in Cambridge to do a debate. And I said to the students there, the Student Union in Cambridge, that night when this all blew up, I said, well, it's clearly become illegal to say what you think about Muhammad, so I'm now going to say it. And I explained to them that I'm not a Muslim, and so therefore, of course, I don't believe that an illiterate tradesman had parts of the Old Testament garbled to him in Arabia in the 7th century, and that I wasn't going to believe it, and that if I did believe it, it would mean I was a Muslim. But I'm not, so I don't. Incredible silence, of course, a sort of sweaty, ignominious silence. And I said to, and there's a number of students who came up to me afterwards and they said, it's true, I've never heard anyone say that before. It's perfectly sensible, but they've never heard it, so say it.
As Douglas rightly points out, the key is to always tell the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. It's crucial, even if it causes a stir. like when Cambridge students face scrutiny for publishing a cartoon of Muhammad. Does this honesty not resonate with people who had never heard such straightforward views before? Douglas made some compelling arguments on multiculturalism and how it's affecting the West. But what are your thoughts on what Douglas had to say on this topic? Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more thought-provoking content.